All right. So, have you guys ever been in a church? Obviously, yes, you have. But you've ever been in a church and the preacher is starting to talk about his message, and it's something common, like the woman at the well. And you're like, I already know what this idea is going to be. I already know what he's going to say. I already know what convicting points he's going to make. And I think this all applies to us because we're Bible majors and we've listened to a lot of sermons and been in church for a while. And so with that, I'm going to be speaking on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But it's not what you think. I think there's a deeper conclusion we can come from this passage. And it's not just about not having idols like normal pastors would just preach on. So now that I have your attention, I hope that it lasts long enough through this passage, but I understand that we're getting into finals week, so no big deal. So I'm starting in Daniel 3, starting in verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and it's set up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and people of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." So what's happening here in this passage is that King Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of Babylon, has made this huge statue out of gold. And some commentators think that this statue the image could have been King Nebuchadnezzar himself. And then some other commentators say, well, it might just be a different god. And in Daniel 2, there's good evidence as why it would be his image, because in King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and then Daniel interpreted it, Daniel said that he would be the head of gold. But the reason of why this is significant is because, not only because King Nebuchadnezzar built this statue, but that he demanded publicly that every nation and people group must bow down to it, even his officials. In these verses, we see two lists. And the first one is naming off all of the officials who are required to bow down to the statue. And what this tells us in this text is that King Nebuchadnezzar is trying to solidify control over the authority within his empire. So essentially, he's an insecure and selfish king. He's trying to gain control by demanding those he's even given authority to bow down to him. And then the second list is of all of the musical instruments that are listed. And when they're played, people are required to bow down to it. So in this passage, we're dealing with an insecure and selfish king who's trying to control his empire by requiring everyone, even the officials, to bow down to the God that he has created. And to make matters worse, following in the next couple of verses, we're dealing with some astrologers who are basically brown-nosing the king. After the instruments play and everyone bows down, in verse 8 it says this: "At this time some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, 'May the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up.'" So now the story's getting juicy. King Nebuchadnezzar's blood is boiling. His control of power is on the line. So he has Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego summoned, and he asks them, "So is it true that you won't bow down to the God that I created?" But then he gives them a second chance, and he's like, "Okay, so when the music plays, bow down to me, but bow down to the statue. And if you and then we're all good. But if you don't, then I'm going to have to throw you into a blazing furnace. But it's your choice. Can you imagine being these three men? I would be sweating bullets out of my mind, not even knowing what's going on. I wouldn't know how to respond, but yet these three men respond with the most epic comeback of all. They say this: King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this manner. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. And here's the part that blows my mind. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. So these three men have the ultimate comebacks to me. I'm terrible at comebacks. If I was them in this situation, I would be like, I can't worship your God, I don't know. And so I try to imagine myself in this story, but I can't, honestly, because I haven't been faced with this intensive persecution. And I think it's safe to say that we all haven't, unless you're a believer who gets offended by the Starbucks cups. Too soon? I don't know. But the reality is that they believed and had enough faith that God was going to deliver them, that they mic dropped King Nebuchadnezzar right then and there. So now we're at the point of the story where you're thinking, okay, I know where she's going with this. She's going to just talk about idols. I know what she's going to say. And we all know that oftentimes pastors conclude this passage by saying, don't bow down to idols, but I think we really do miss out on something deeper within this passage. But I definitely think that we all have gone through, or even go through now, times in our lives where we are idolizing things over our relationship with God. But I think the place that we live in today, and I don't really see people telling me to bow down to a 60-cubit high and 60-cubit wide gold statue. In Seattle, we're told that we can do whatever we want. And in that, our world is telling us that it's okay to bow down to ourselves. We live in an age where selfishness born out of insecurity is king. And what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did was a selfless act to declare over all of the providence of Babylon that we will not stand for any other god but the true God, even if it gets us killed. But I think there's something bigger. I think there's a bigger idea that we can conclude from this passage. So going back to the story, these three men have just mic dropped King Nebuchadnezzar. But they didn't get the last word. King Nebuchadnezzar has become furious now. He told the people to now set the temperature of the furnace to 7 times what it usually is. And I imagine that, and I kind of think of it as if when you take like a Hot Pocket and you put it in the microwave for like 10 minutes and then you take it out and you just put it in your mouth, like burning hot, right? Probably not, because it was so hot that the officials who took them into the furnace even died themselves. But these three men were delivered from the heat of death, and King Nebuchadnezzar saw that they weren't burning, so he called them out and he said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than to serve or worship any god except their own." And then he declared over all of the people of the nation that no one can say anything against the God that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego serve. And so what I find interesting about this is that King Nebuchadnezzar noted that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego trusted in their God, and that they were willing to give up their whole lives for him. The king wasn't just amazed that they survived the fiery furnace, but he was amazed at their character. And this is what I see in this passage. 3 men making a choice to actually put into action what they believe to be true about their God, and by doing so, God backs them up, and then the king is in awe of their character. So much so that he declares over all of the nation that all people are supposed to show respect to their God. And the reality is that the world is waiting for us to look at the face of our own selfishness and refuse to bow down. Because I believe that the greatest sign we can ever perform for this world is a life lived devoted to our King, or even if in the face of persecution, our character reflects Christ. We as Christians tell the world that we're different because we have Jesus, right? But the world comes into our churches, sees our selfishness of only doing things when we feel comfortable, and only worshiping to music that we think is good. And the world says, you're no different from us. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are three selfless men who give us a story that we can apply to our lives so that we can look a little bit more like Jesus. Because in the midst of their persecution and in the midst of Jesus' persecution, they both declare to God the Father that it's not my will, but it's your will be done. So this is more than just a story about not having idols. This is a story that tells us that the world sees our character in the midst of persecution and pain and when our faith is tested. And they're waiting for our God to not pull through and just to wait and see us complain about it. When I think of a person of character, I think of my pastor Russell, and it's not just because I'm biased because he's my pastor, but because of the life that he has lived himself. Over the past year, he had a job as a young adult pastor, and he taught at the school that was run there, and he had a house with his wife. He had a steady income. But then God challenged him with this idea of, you preach radical Christianity, but are you willing to live it? And he responded to that and said, yes, God, I am. Here I am. Use me. And so he sold his house. He no longer had an income. He had to move in with his in-laws. If that's not humble beginnings, I don't know what is. And then he had a vision that God gave him to plant a church in the city of Snohomish. And what's amazing about him, and I think about his life, is that when he preaches, this point always comes back into play, and it's that God will always provide for his church, but even if he doesn't, he's still good. He's still faithful. And so through Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the king of their nation saw not only a miracle of deliverance from the furnace, but saw loyal, selfless characters within their hearts. So how do we show the world that we're Christians of character? We have an opportunity as ministers to be like a Shadrach within our ministry by choosing to still worship and bow down to the true King despite what other voices around us say. I think we have an opportunity as ministers to be like a Meshach within our ministry by having an attitude that says, my King is able to deliver me from any situation, and even if he doesn't, I'll still be faithful. And I think we have an opportunity as ministers to be like an Abednego within our ministry by having a character that makes the world stop and say, you know, they have something different. They actually truly serve their King. And most importantly, we have an opportunity to be like Christ within our ministry by sacrificing ourselves to God for the benefit of humanity, that we might see our students, our peers, our family members come to repentance. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego went into the fire to show character and faith they had. And because of it, the nation was to show respect to the God that they served. If we all lived like these three men, just try to imagine what our world's response would be. Thank you.